the Agile brand.
Welcome to the Delighted Customers Podcast, now part of the Agile Brand Podcast Network. I'm your host, Mark Slayton, and I am so glad you're here. I empower leaders to delight their customers, and I talk to guests with a wide range of expertise who share meaningful insights, wisdom, and practical tips that you can use immediately. I'm also excited to announce the Trusted Guide Roadmap Masterclass for CX leaders who struggle with executive buy-in and are ready to go beyond CX fundamentals. The Masterclass gives you proven frameworks and takes you step by step through a 4-step model that will move you past the frustration of not getting your work done. It's unique because it's live, interpersonal, hands-on, and we give you tools and templates to help you build your CX roadmap. To learn more, visit empoweredcx.com. That's EMPOWEREDCX.com. And now on to the show. Well, I am so excited to have back on the Delighted Customers podcast, Charlie Green. Charlie is the founder of Trusted Advisor Associates. He founded the organization after he helped co-write the Trusted Advisor book, and then came up with a couple more books, the Trust-Based Selling book, and then the Trusted Advisor Field book, and has been a leader and icon in the world of trust, especially when it's around business. I am incredibly excited because I get to talk to him about the intersection of trust and customer experience management. Charlie, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Mark. It's such a pleasure to be back here with you. Thank you.
Well, we had more to talk about after the last one, which was a great episode. Charlie was like one of my first 5 episodes, and I think we're getting close to 85 or something like that. And so it shouldn't be so long between visits next time. But we've got some really important things to talk about. There's just almost an endless area to talk about conversations when it comes to trust. And one of the things I wanted to hit with you today was this notion that I've heard over and over again from so-called thought leaders that trust takes time and the C-suite expects results now, short term. And I've been an advocate for this idea that actually trust doesn't have to take time. And they say, Mark, you've got it all wrong. So what guidance can you share for leaders who are trying to impact organizational change?
Well, let's see. Let's start off with that quote. People are telling you trust takes time and the C-suite wants results immediately. That suggests either the C-suite doesn't know what they're talking about because they expect results immediately, whereas trust takes time, or you're wrong. They got it right. They expect that it doesn't take time, and you got the problem. So either way, something's wrong there. I'm with you, Mark. In some important ways, trust does not take time. There's one big exception to that. If you go to the trust equation, which we talked about last time, 4 components of trustworthiness. One of them is reliability. Now, by definition, that one takes time because that's the accumulation of experiences over time, which ends up in us saying, "Oh, he's highly reliable. He did everything he said he would do. He did it on time." Yeah, that takes accumulated experiences, which by definition take time. The other ones don't. Credibility, if you have, you walk into a doctor's office, they're wearing a white coat, there's a degree on the wall from an institution you've heard of, the stethoscope is around their neck, there's all kinds of crazy bottles and white paper and stuff, and you go, "Oh, doctor, medical, bow down, authority, credibility, credentials." That's pretty quick. And in fact, human beings, we've evolved over millions, hundreds of millions of years, and we're pretty good at rapidly figuring out, our surroundings. And we make snap judgments, which 9 times out of 10, if not 99 out of 100, are right. We've gotten very good at surviving in the world. So we make snap judgments about credibility. They're not always right, but, they're more right than we think. The other 2 components, which are, I call the softer emotional ones, intimacy and low self-orientation, those are overwhelmingly instant, very fast. It's when you meet somebody, we don't think about it, but if you step back, you meet somebody within seconds, you have an impression of them. And many business gurus have said you only have one chance to make a first impression. People make up their minds within 10 seconds. Well, there's a lot of truth to that. And it gets down to things like eye contact, firmness of handshake. Are they looking down when they're talking to you? Do their questions indicate that they were listening to the last thing you said, or are they wrapped up in their head? These are subtle. These are hard to describe behaviorally, much less put them in terms of metrics and behaviors and stuff. But we all get it. We do this every day. We interact with people. You cross somebody on the street, you look in the eye for a moment and you have an impression. I like that person. I don't like that person. What's up with them? What's their problem? These are almost instant. So, and trust, if you work that stuff in your favor, you can create connections, strong ones on the basis of intimacy and low self orientation, like being curious about the other person almost from the get go. It doesn't take time. And, the other stuff builds up over time. But if you can be that person whom you meet and the other person's quickly say, oh, wow, this, I kind of like this person. I get this. This is interesting. That's more than a small beginning on trust. Now, that part of trust, all that emotional stuff that I just talked about, doesn't get talked about very much. Most people in corporations prefer to talk in the accepted corporate speak of metrics and behaviors and competency skills and tracking stuff. We're not very well equipped in 21st century business in the Western world to deal with the emotional stuff that's really a lot of what's happening. So if people individually can remember that, can learn that and appreciate it and get a little bit better at forging those instant connections, that's a big leg up on trust. And it does not take time. It really is. In fact, if anything, over a very short period of time, it's a time saver. You don't have to go through all the usual stuff that you do, in formal settings to get to know people and make a decision about whether they're trustworthy. You can shortcut a lot. It's actually a time saver in many ways. So I hope that's something of an answer.
Yeah, no, that you reminded me of a quote from Gerald Saltman, who researched at your old school, Harvard. I don't know if you crossed paths with him when you were there, but the study was about what drives decision makings in humans, and 95% of decisions are made in the subconscious. Um,
Absolutely.
and it was kind of a shock back then, but
Yeah,
what do you think about that percentage?
I think is exactly right. And you and I've talked about this before. If you look at the typical business decision, let's take the sales field for a minute because it's just
Mm,
such a clean example.
mm,
Salesperson reach out, you meet somebody, you get an email, whatever. They send a proposal. And at first you look at it rather clinically. Do these people have a track record? Do they sound like they know what they're talking about? Have they got good educational pedigrees? Have they ever worked in our industry? Those are all very rational cognitive thoughts. And then you get to know them and you interact with them and you talk back and forth. And eventually you get to a point where you think, yeah, let's do it. And that itself is kind of an emotional response. It may be, there was a lot of rational stuff that led up to it, but that flash moment, that light bulb, is very much what he's talking about, that subconscious. And then we go back to the rational. Then you got to, justify your decision to the C-suite or the board of directors or whatever, and you dress it back up in all the rational. We went with them because they have such a great track record and experience with our industry. So it's like, and I've talked about this, the sandwich model. The
mm.
meat in the sandwich is the decision, and it's very emotional. The bread on both sides of the sandwich are the rational. And we pay attention to the rational all the time, but it's just the bread. The real meat in the sandwich comes from a rather subjective, unconscious, subconscious kind of a decision. So that makes a lot of sense to me. I think he's right.
So for me, just to affirm what you're saying, I think about this, and if I'm a C-suite executive and people make the argument, well, all their decisions are rational. You are on the one end of the spectrum, you share with them an ROI, and if your ROI is better than the ROI of your initiative from marketing or accounting or audit or whatever other department, then your proposal will win the day. Well, I would argue this. I would argue, number one, I, just a CX leader, may have more than one initiative that I'm putting forward. Multiply that by the other ones that they're looking at, and you've
Right.
got proposal A that costs X and returns Y. Proposal B that costs Z and returns G. And we could just go on and getting away from the math for a minute, the other stated objectives or goals for that year by the C-suite. So that could be, I want new accounts, I want retention rates, I want cost reduction, whatever
Right.
that particular hot button is. And what about risk?
Yeah.
It could be that you're this year. I'll give you two examples. One, rolling out a new backbone for your organization, a new core system that runs your organization, a computer system. Or you could have just gone through a merger and acquisition, and you're melding together two organizations. There's a lot of risk associated with that.
Right.
So which proposal they take. So now, and then you've got, make up the number, 7 to 12 executives, all
Right.
have different motivations. How are you going to tell me that because you can show a good ROI for something, it's going to get adopted?
Yeah. I mean, you're pointing out there's multiple inputs, even in the rational realm. And I think what happens is somebody finally says, you know what, I got a good feeling about this one,
There
even
you
though the
go.
ROI 2 points less. And and I think that's kind of how it happens. You hear things like, what's the old joke? If you ask a mathematician what 2 plus 2, they say 4. You ask an accountant what's 2 plus 2, they say, what do you want it to be? And you get ROI numbers in, and I think people look at them skeptically, and they say things like, if you can check up the ROI a few points, I think we could do this. Go back and rework the numbers. Or this feels close enough. You never know. I'm not sure I really have confidence in their numbers. But you don't wait to get confidence in the numbers. You go with a gut feel. It's a summation of all the stuff you just said and I just said. And people go, let's do this. And you read the room and others go, yeah, I'm good with that.
Yeah. I mean, and I'll ask a rhetorical question at the end here, is like, how many C-suite executives who said they used ROI, or the perception is ROI is really what drives decision making, have gone back 2, 3 years later and
Right,
measured the ROI of that?
right, right. It's a fiction we all tell ourselves that we live in a rational world. We are all rational actors. And indeed, the history of science and engineering and all that stuff shows great arguments in favor of a rational view of the world. But if you dig a little deeper, talk to psychologists, the philosophers, novelists, it's not quite so simple.
Yeah. I think for a leader trying to make change in an organization, I think you have to be able to share a story.
Absolutely.
Right. So I'll let you're a great storyteller. Share from your perspective when you think about sharing a story about helping a story that is a catalyst for change to people that you want to influence. How does that work?
The interesting thing to me, I totally agree with your mentioning stories. I was going to bring that up too. The reason that stories work is, first of all, people. Here's a gross generalization. I'm not a psychologist, but I'll make this assertion. Nobody likes to be told what to do.
Mm,
We all react negatively to being told what to do. On the other hand, if you tell somebody a story, a metaphor, an analogy, they listen to it. And even if it's sort of obvious, the point you're trying to make, they don't feel threatened. They don't feel coerced. They don't feel ordered around. They listen to the story and they kind of draw their own conclusions in their own way with no outside pressure. So, to me, that's the magic of stories. You don't feel coerced by somebody telling you a story. They don't. They can be only vaguely on point, and it still works. It's still kind of an amazing thing to me that it does work. Stories really are a great way that leaders can influence.
If I could share an illustration and get your feedback, I was on a call with someone in a bank outside of the U.S. Yesterday, as a matter of fact, and they were asking me about how to get unstuck in a situation where they were trying to get leadership's approval on something.
Yeah.
And I shared this, great, you got the numbers, right? You've got whatever operational numbers or other data, some cost data. I said, but what if you took some of the comments, whether they're from the electronic surveys or call in, wherever the customer comments are from, and say, this is this is Maria Smith, who's been with us for a while, and she's stating this issue. She's stating an issue. I'll make it up. Why do I have to call into the call center to reset my password?
Right.
Right. I don't have to do that with your competitor. And this represents a large percentage. In fact, this would be one of the top three themes that we're getting from our customer base. And so we're suggesting, we automate that, or we allow them to self-service passwords and figure out a way with our operations folks on how to do that, because we believe that it reduced the number of calls coming in by X, and each call coming into the call center costs 10 times more than that of a 20 times more than that of a self-service.
Right.
And so, but the story, so I'm not just telling you that we could save X dollars. I'm telling you the story of Maria.
Yeah, exactly. There's a reason at the State of the Union address, the
Mm,
president in recent years always bring people live and they tell a story. I talked to a young woman that did this and did that. There's a reason that's very impactful.
yeah. Yeah. And so we're talking about ways really that leaders who trying to make change can become perceived as a trustworthy person, someone worthy of becoming trusted. So part of the goal of a leader, and again, I've shared this with you, that we as CX leaders tend to have small budgets, limited
Yeah,
sized teams, and very little, if any, positional authority.
right,
So you've said this. Therefore, we've got to get things done through influencing others, because we can't do it within our own organization.
right.
So this high stake, and whether other CX leaders, this is something I'm chanting from the rooftops, is we need to become more trustworthy. We need to do so. You mentioned the trust equation and some tools about listening and curiosity. What are some other ways that leaders who want to make change can become more trustworthy?
Well, stories are one. Role modeling is a big second one. Learn the trust equation inside out and start to live it. There are many areas of business where if a leader says X and does Y, we don't ding them to it for much. We understand their role, their position. But when it comes to trust, if there's a disconnect between what you're telling other people to do and what you do yourself, we don't hesitate. We call it hypocritical, cynical, doesn't believe what he says. Why should I do it if he's not doing it? We get very critical. So I think, walking the talk is pretty important, and calling out the ideas behind what you're doing at the same time to emphasize this is conscious. This isn't just me winging it. I believe in establishing intimacy with people when I meet them. Therefore, that's why I asked you that question, or that's why I shared this thing about me with you, because I believe it. And this is the kind of thing we all need to be doing. That's why I said what I said. So a mixture of the conscious and the actions, those are two. I think, to sort of pick some more practical ones, the leaders can do: share things about themselves, be vulnerable. Vulnerability is not one of the components in the trust equation, but it's an overlapping Venn diagram, particularly when it comes to intimacy and low self-orientation. If you show curiosity about the other person and you nod your head in the right places as they're telling you about themselves, you're establishing a trust connection. And when leaders do that, other people see it and they say, "Oh, it's okay to do that. Wow, I saw so and so do that. That's impressive. I want to do that too." I think another thing, your point is well taken. You're talking about people with small budgets and low positional authority. And I think there's a model of change which has always struck me as very useful in organizations. And it's the infectious disease model. It's not hierarchical. It doesn't roll out, it doesn't go sequentially. It's, things reach critical mass bit by bit, the crystals crystallize. You dive into the example that's in front of you. You talk to the person next to you. You say something at the meeting you're going to, and you don't know exactly what the impact's going to be, but you don't stop doing it. You put it out there, and rely less on rollout programs and messaging and more on those interpersonal interactions.
You had shared with me recently that you had written a blog or something a few years back, and you kind of out of the blue got an affirmation from someone who read it and said, "That's the best blog that you've
Yeah.
ever written."
Yeah. Well, it went to one of the topics that you and I have also talked about, which is how do you get over criticism or bad reactions or pushback or objections. And the key to that, our parents taught us this in the schoolyards when we were kids. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. Well, we need to remember that because if you're accustomed to, reacting and resenting and being angry and worried about what people are going to think of you, think about it. That is all wrapped up in yourself. That is a self shooting of the foot because you're lost inside yourself. You're unconnected to the people around you. Worse yet, you're resenting something that happened in the past. It's never going to change. It's done. It's the past. Get over it. You may have heard the story of Gordon Moore and Andy Grove. And at the time, those two leaders of Intel were in memory chips early on, and they were losing ground fast to the Japanese. They started off with like 80% market share. They were getting down to 30. They were getting their butts kicked and handed to them. And Grove said to Moore, he said, if the board fired us and brought somebody else in, what do you think that the new person would do? And Moore answered, well, they'd probably sell the memory business and get into semiconductors. And Grove said, tell you what, why don't we walk out the door, fire ourselves, come back in, get out of memory, and get into semiconductors? Do the same thing. And of course, that's what they did. And and it was brilliant. And that company survived, decades more. What they did was to say, let's stop feeling beat up and put upon. Let's accept reality, and take charge back of it. So I think this, and it's a great trait for leaders, be thick skinned. I mean, always be sensitive to other people's feelings, but get in the habit of putting your own feelings on hold. Get over it. Nobody else cares much what your feelings are except you anyway. So deal with it. And I think that's very helpful for any kind of leader, but particularly ones with lacking in positional. You can't just order people to do what you want in a CX role like you outlined. What you can do is engage with people, and the enemy of good trust relationships is not arguments or disagreements, it's disengagement. As they're objecting to you, you're still having a dialogue, you're having a relationship, something's going on. And if push your way through the noise and not get bent out of shape, stay focused on the other person and on the mission, it's a great skill to have.
Some great gems there, folks. There's one other that you triggered when you talked about role modeling.
Yeah.
I was thinking about just this idea of kind of an awareness if you're a change agent of any kind. And it's like like a fish tank, and there's these goldfish that have been swimming around for months, and then a new fish comes in, and the other fish are really worried, they're curious, they're anxious, they're feeling threatened by that. And you could feel like you don't trust them,
Yeah.
which is going to be problematic if you're trying to be trustworthy, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. If you want other people to trust you, but you don't trust them, guess what? You just shot yourself on the foot again. One of the fundamental dynamics of people is that we return like for like, good for good, bad for bad. If I think you're angry at me, I'm going to be angry at you. If I like you, you're more likely to like me. If I don't like you, you're more likely not to like me. If I don't trust you, no way you're going to trust me.
So there's a reciprocity axiom.
That's the word. That's right.
Another gem, folks. They're coming at you fast now, so you should write them down. Not if you're driving, but write them down. What are some of your favorite examples of success stories when it comes to people, maybe unlikely heroes of the story that gain trust?
Yeah. Well, I'll give you. I don't think I've ever shared this on a podcast or interview before, but
We love it.
this comes to mind. This may be a little far stretched, but bear with me. Abraham Lincoln, early in the Civil War, The North was kind of losing at the beginning. And France, in particular, was angling, which side to support. They were open to both sides, North or South. There were good economic arguments. So anyway, one day they learned that the French were sending a delegation of their top two or three military leaders to Washington to meet with Lincoln to determine whether the military force of the North was sufficient. So it was a very important meeting. And Lincoln's military advisors said, well, we got to brief you. You got to get educated on this stuff. And Lincoln said, don't worry about it. We'll deal with it when it comes up. So the military leaders come and they said, we've been looking at your battlefield statistics. And if you look at the number of casualties in each battle, and then you look at the roster the day after, there's a gap. And that gap has to be desertions. If you subtract the casualties, it's still not enough. People are leaving, which means you have no discipline, which means you have no morale, which means ultimately you have no political support. What do you say to that? And Lincoln's leaders back in the room are like quaking in their boots. Oh my God, how's he going to answer that? He doesn't know anything about military. And Lincoln says, well, that reminds me of a story. And they're all thinking, oh my God, not a story. And Lincoln says to the generals, he says, say there's two birds on a tree up there, and you take a gun and you shoot one bird. How many are left? And the general said, one. He said, actually, no. That bird gets scared and flies away, so there's none. He says, something like that happens in the battlefield, too. There's all this blood and gore, and the battles often happen at night, people dying, and, horrible hell on earth. And sure enough, you look in the next morning, they're out wandering around. But if you look at the day after, you'll find we're back to full strength. And that's a testament to our will and our commitment and our morale. So actually, we got more power than you think. And the French general said, oh my God, this guy's never been to war and he's talking about mud and blood. And this guy, and he knows the stats. Oh my goodness. And of course, the French then came in on the side of the North. Now, I think what he did there, he posed like, oh, shucks, I'm just an old country lawyer type. And he wasn't. He was pretty smart. But he also brought them in through that story, as we talked about, and made it informal, made a connection with them in ways that they could, they weren't offended by him saying, no, there's only one bird left. They get it. I don't know. There's probably some other lessons in that too, but it always struck me as a gem of a story about how to hold an audience's connection with a seemingly weird metaphor that's actually right on spot.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I love that story. And Abe Lincoln certainly was one who was highly trusted and overcame probably more than any other person you can think of, and what he had
Yeah.
to overcome.
And it's no accident that he's known as a master storyteller.
I wanted to ask a question that we didn't get to last time, but it reminded me of how important it is when it comes to restoring trust after it's been broken.
Right.
And what are some philosophies around that? I know you and I have talked about this, but for our audience, there's this another common, I'll go out on a limb and say it's a myth, is that trust may not take that long to, those people may say that trust may not take that long to build, but broken trust always takes long to build. What do you say to that?
That also is sort of wrong. The usual formulation is like trust takes a long time to build and only a moment to destroy.
Right.
Well, we've already said it doesn't take a long time to build, not necessarily.
Hmm.
Yeah, certain trust can be broken in an instant. If a close friend of yours does something wrong, you don't throw them out. You say, hey, that's not like you. What's going on? You were off. I couldn't disagree with you more. That was totally out of character. What's up? That's what you say to somebody you trust deeply. So first of all, you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater if there's deep trust to begin with. Second of all, and this was confirmed, 3 decades ago, there was some really good research on customer loyalty done by Bain in collaboration with Harvard Business School. And they showed with deep data that trust recovered is trust stronger than trust before it got broken. So it's actually an opportunity. So if there's a breach in the trust, the way you get it back is, first of all, you acknowledge and over acknowledge your part in whatever it was, and stay away from blaming. I did this, yeah, but you did that. No, stay away from the you did that. Just say, listen, things went wrong. I know what I did here. I did this, that, and the other, and I wish I hadn't done that. That was wrong. I want you to know that I know it's wrong. You want to evoke the reaction. Okay, okay, I get it. Stop apologizing. You weren't apologizing. You were acknowledging. You were taking responsibility. And that's the key, to take responsibility for your own actions. And if you do that humbly enough and sincerely enough, people will recognize it, and they may not forget it, but they'll forgive you. They'll look past it. They'll remember why there was this connection. And it's stronger than ever because you got through it. I mean, think of all the little spats people have with their spouses, and you get through them, and most times, not all, but most times, you're stronger for having gone through it.
Yeah, and you said, not all. There are some things that are so egregious
Sure.
from a business, from
Sure.
business standpoint that you just
Yeah.
lost my loyalty. But for the most part, to your point, is you're walking through these steps and you realize that if the trust is deep enough, that you're going to have at least have a conversation or a
Yeah.
second chance or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, go back to the FedEx example. Suppose you actually get to know your FedEx driver to the point where you even say, could you watch my kids for 5 minutes while I run down the street? Or, you told me you know something about bicycle repair. Could you have a look at something? If you have that kind of a relationship with your FedEx driver, which is unusual, I grant it, but if you do, and they miss two deliveries, no problem. You say, hey, Jose, Joe, come on, you missed two. I mean, you know where I live. Come on, give me a break here. You can make light of it, and the driver will be apologetic and swear to never do it again, and they probably won't.
Yeah. So but to put this into the context of practice at CX, I want to just share a story from a recent podcast guest that is the company is called Pink Zebra Moving, and the
Cool.
the CEO is Ron Halt. And Ron built this model for his business, which is unlike any other moving company that I'm familiar with, based on the fact that his mother-in-law told him about a horror story when she moved from one side of Birmingham, Alabama to another. And then he started asking some other people and do some research and found out this is not that uncommon, that people who deal with moving have a horrible experience.
Yeah.
And what he said was that, Mark, people are thinking two things when they bring when a mover comes over. One, will something get broken? And two, will something get stolen?
Right. Right.
Right. And so with this awareness, you're kind of, this is me paraphrasing, kind of starting
Yeah.
behind the eight ball here. As people come in, there's this huge stranger danger and, expectation. So when you think about customer experience management, you should be thinking about all the customer touch points. And that's the way he designed his business, particularly heavy emphasis on the beginning part of that. So he comes in, they introduce people by name, they spend some time getting to know the people, and there's a process for this where they're not just saying, where do you want this to go? What goes where? And there is this procedure in the middle where they go through connecting with people and actually have a little process they go through for Pink Zebra video. Not video. They actually have a mascot that comes in and does this little act or whatever to lighten people's humor up. And at the end, they have a little gift for them that's personalized, that's customized, that they go through with these people, and it's all about the experience. It's personalized, it's customized, and they have grown now. He's been in this business 3 years. They have now 8 states that they're in, with 4 more slated for the end of this year. So, a great success story from someone who has designed his entire business model based on understanding those touch points and designing into the experience something that makes it unique, that understands where there's tension between the customer, where there's an opportunity of low trust, talk about low trust, and they're building into the design of it. How can I build in some trust into it? How can I, at the outset, humanize my movers to these people so that there's a little bit of forgiveness and understanding when something goes wrong? Because in a
Right.
move with X number of items, the odds are something is going to go wrong.
Yeah. I love it. That it resonates with my own experience moving. I had exactly that fear. And I learned to proactively reach out to the movers and say something personal to them. If I were the mover, I would tell the guy that runs Pink Whatever, I'd say, listen, when you see a piece of furniture, say, oh man, my kids would love that. You want to get a dialogue, oh, how many kids you have? What kind of what? And of course, people appreciate having comment. You make a personal connection,
Yeah.
so the stranger danger dissolves when you're talking to somebody, right?
Yeah. And my kids would love that. Not that it's going to disappear.
Right. Yes, right. And once you do that,
Yeah.
even if worst case, you did employ a bunch of thieves, they're much less likely to steal from somebody they just made a connection with.
Yeah.
I don't mean to badmouth movers at all. Hardly anybody actually does that, but of course we're afraid of it.
Yeah. I mean, and like anything else, CX, like good CX, a good experience doesn't overcome really bad business management. So, and poor quality service, repeatedly, it doesn't overcome high price, price that's not competitive. So you've got to kind of get these other basics in place,
Yeah,
which in this case, Pink Zebra Moving has, but also to make it a human, understand those touch points and make it a human experience.
right.
Yeah. Yeah. We talked today about trust takes time, the myth of that. We talked today about this idea of a sandwich,
Right.
the rational and the emotional, and the rational again as being the emotional being the meat in that sandwich. We talked about how decisions get made in reality, and and that's really based largely on emotion. And you talked about this idea of trust first. To bet one of the good ways to be trustworthy is to trust others.
Yeah, there's a famous quote by I forget his name, but he was the Secretary of Stanton, Secretary of War under Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt. And he always said the fastest way to make a man trustworthy is to trust him.
Hmm.
And people that we work with, they love to focus on the trust equation. That's the most famous part of the book. But it's all about being trustworthy. Trustworthiness is kind of a passive virtue. The line in the sales area is aggressively waiting for the phone to ring. You can be as aggressive as you want. You're still sitting there waiting. If you'd like to control your own destiny, you have to figure out ways to trust the other person,
Hmm.
because you mentioned reciprocity. If you trust them, they're much more likely to trust you. And it is possible to figure out little ways to trust, the other person in small ways, and that builds the process, the sequence of trust creation.
Perfect. Wow, what a great session. What a great record. We need to land the plane. Anything we missed relative to trust that you could think of in the CX world that we should have brought up?
We hit a lot of good ones. I mean, if I had to sum everything up, I'd say get better at being curious and listening.
Hmm.
Get rid of Stop your own fears, get rid of your own ego, just listen and be curious. If you do that, you'll stumble your way into a lot of the other good stuff we talked about.
Why is it so hard for us to be curious and listen?
Great question. Everybody says struggle with it. I think it's fear. There's a good friend of mine who years ago said the root negative human emotion is fear. He's not a psychologist or anything, but that struck true to me. We're afraid of not getting what we want, afraid of losing what we have. And there have been studies that say, short term fear is a much bigger motivator for people than long term benefit. You look at it in the political world, attack ads tend to do better, unfortunately, than, let's talk unemotionally about the positive good that I've been doing, da 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 da. So get over your fears and recognize, and this is true too, most fears are unjustified. They're just made up stupid monsters under the bed in our own heads. So you can at least look clinically at them and say, well, what am I afraid of? I'm going to have dinner tonight. I have a roof over my head. I'm not going to get fired. I paid my bills last month. What am I afraid of? The guy looked crosswise at me. Yeah,
Yeah.
shrug it off.
One of the things I learned from attending one of your training programs long time ago around this topic that's coming to mind for me was this tendency we have to jump to solutions.
Yes.
That's we're kind of bred and learn at a young age, and in school to be the first to raise our hand with the answer.
Right. Me, teacher, I know. Yeah.
Yet, like if we're curious and we're interested in genuinely listening to the other person, we gotta throttle that.
Yeah, we do. And it's and I think business in general, unfortunately, has been an enabler of that. Drive to the answers. What are the practical, what are the behaviors? What are the skills? What are the answers? What's the ROI? And they forget that fundamental truth that nobody likes to be told what to do. People do, however, appreciate you coming over on their side of the line, empathizing with them, understanding what it's like, and then together saying, gee, it sounds like the issue is this. What would you think of this idea? Or what do you think? How should we do here? And when you do that, the solutions emerge naturally because they emerge collaboratively without any defenses. I was listening, there's a podcast I listen to all the time now, Kara Swisher and Scott Galloway, and they had a guest on just today talking about all of what he's learned about listening. And he's saying exactly the same thing. I know in the 12 steps of AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, one of the prescriptions in meetings is you don't talk to other people, you don't crosstalk. You share your own experience, strength, and hope, and you listen to others when they share theirs. You don't give advice to people. You're there to listen and occasionally to share your own story. And that's good advice too, because again, people don't like to be told what to do. However, they love stories and they love hearing from other people.
Mm.
And it's all the same stuff in that way.
Yeah. It's a gift. It's a gift to listen to someone, truly listen.
It's a gift to both parties.
Yeah.
A gift to the other person, and it's a gift to you too, because it allows you to connect with them on a more fundamental level.
Yeah. Beautiful. Charlie, thank you so much for being on the show. Always great to have you.
It's a pleasure, Mark.
Thanks for listening to the Delighted Customers Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode or any of my other ones, hit subscribe or follow. I've got a lot of other great guests that are coming up and a lot of other great content, and I don't want you to miss anything. You can find any links or references on the show in the show notes, and you can find those at my website at empoweredcx.com. That's EMPOWEREDCX.com. Also, make sure to check out the other shows in the Agile Brand Podcast Network by going to www.agilebrandguide.com. The Delighted Customers Podcast with Mark Slayton is produced by Missing Link, a Latina-owned, strategy-driven, creatively fueled production co-op. From ideation to creation, they craft human connections through intelligent, engaging, and informative content.
The Agile Brand.